Have you ever had your greatest strength turned against you? Imagine crossing half a continent with nothing but hope in your heart, only to be told you're too much for the very future you were promised. Today, we're going to journey back to 1891, when a woman's education was often seen as a liability rather than an asset. This is the story of Emma Wilson, a Boston schoolteacher who answered a marriage advertisement, only to discover that some men fear a woman who can think for herself. But it's also the story of how rejection can lead us exactly where we belong, if we have the courage to keep standing in our truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When the first snows of November 1891 blanketed Boston in white silence, Emma Wilson sat alone in her modest apartment, a letter clutched in her trembling hands. The handwriting was sturdy and confident, much like the man who'd penned it, Thomas Blackwell, a cattle rancher from Pine Ridge, Montana. For the third time that evening, Emma read his words aloud, letting them fill the empty room. I seek a woman of good character and gentle disposition to share my home, tend my household, and stand beside me as we build a life in Montana territory. I offer security, respect, and the promise of a family. I'm a man of means with 500 acres and a house built by my own hands. Emma touched the paper reverently. At 32, she'd long given up the dream of marriage. Not for lack of suitors, she'd had several, but because none could accept that her passion for knowledge was as much a part of her as her heartbeat. In Boston's educated circles, she was too opinionated, too scholarly. A woman who'd attended college when most believed a woman's education should end at basic arithmetic and penmanship. The Mirror told a different story than the one society wrote for her. Emma wasn't plain, despite what gossip said. Her chestnut hair framed a face with intelligent hazel eyes and lips that curved easily into a smile. Her figure was neither willowy nor stout, but strong from years of standing before classrooms full of children. She was handsome, perhaps, rather than pretty. Substantial in a way that intimidated men who preferred women as decorative as porcelain figurines. After 15 years teaching Boston's children, Emma had saved enough for a modest living. But each night, she returned to silent rooms. Each morning, she awoke to the same view of brick buildings and smoke-stained sky. The children she taught grew up and moved on, while her own life remained static, pressed between pages like a dried flower. In that stillness, Thomas Blackwell's advertisement in the Boston Globe had caught her eye 6 months ago. Rancher seeks wife, must be healthy, hardworking, and kind. Those simple words had sparked something long dormant, a chance for change, a home of her own, perhaps even children before it was too late. Their correspondence had been brief but promising. Thomas wrote of vast skies and mountain ranges, of building something meaningful in a land still young. Emma had been honest about her age and occupation, though she'd tempered mentions of her education at Oberlin College. When his proposal came, 4 letters in, she'd hesitated only briefly before accepting. Now, as Boston's early darkness pressed against her windows, Emma folded the letter and looked around at the dismantled remnants of her life. Books were her most precious possessions, carefully wrapped and packed in crates addressed to Pine Ridge, Montana. She'd sold her furniture, donated her teaching supplies to younger colleagues, and said tearful goodbyes to the few friends who understood her decision. All that remained was a trunk containing practical dresses, sturdy boots, a handful of treasured volumes she couldn't bear to ship separately, and her mother's gold locket. Inside, a tiny portrait of the woman who'd insisted her daughter receive. An education that can never be taken from you, even when everything else is gone. Emma ran her fingers over the trunk's brass clasps. Tomorrow she would board a train westward, leaving behind everything familiar. The journey would take nearly a week, Boston to Chicago, Chicago to St. Paul, then the Northern Pacific Line to Montana Territory. Each mile would carry her further from civilization as she knew it, closer to a man she'd never met and a life she could only imagine. "This is madness," whispered her colleague Martha during their final tea together. "You know nothing about this man. The West is still wild, lawless in places. You're abandoning everything you've worked for." Emma had simply smiled. "I'm not abandoning my education or my principles. I'm taking them where they might do some good. And if this rancher expects a docile wife who never opens a book?" The question had lingered, unanswered. In the grey light of morning, Emma dressed with particular care, her travelling suit of navy wool, practical yet flattering, with a white shirtwaist and modest hat. She pinned her hair in a simple coil at the nape of her neck, tucked her mother's locket beneath her collar, and donned gloves that had seen better days but were still presentable. The journey west passed in a blur of swaying carriages, changing landscapes, and brief, unsatisfying rest in railway hotels. Emma watched as dense eastern forests gave way to the vast openness of the prairie. Cities thinned, settlements grew, more modest, and the sky, oh the sky, expanded in ways she'd never imagined possible. It seemed to her that the further west they traveled, the more the earth surrendered dominance to the heavens. She shared compartments with various travelers, a young mother with twin boys headed to join her husband in Wyoming, an elderly couple returning to their homestead in Dakota Territory, a trio of boisterous young men seeking fortune in Montana's copper mines. Emma kept largely to herself, reading or gazing out the window, though she helped the young mother manage her energetic sons and listened patiently to the elderly couple's stories of frontier life. "Never been to Montana, ma'am?" asked the elderly gentleman, noticing her rapt attention to the changing view. "No, I'm going to be married there," Emma replied, surprised at how strange the words felt on her tongue. "Mail order bride, then?" There was no judgment in his tone, merely curiosity. Emma nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm to marry a rancher in Pine Ridge." The man's wife leaned forward. "Pine Ridge? We passed through there 2 years back. Pretty little town, nestled right up against the mountains. Good people, from what I recall." The final leg of the journey seemed interminable. As the train chugged into Montana Territory, Emma's confidence began to waver. The landscape was beautiful but harsh, rolling grassland interrupted by jutting rock formations, distant mountains sharp against the horizon, lonely homesteads separated by miles of emptiness. This land demanded something from its inhabitants, a resilience, a stubborn determination that Emma wasn't sure she possessed. In her last letter, she'd informed Thomas of her arrival date and time. He'd responded with a brief note, confirming he would meet her at the station. Nothing more. No expressions of anticipation or affection, simply logistical acknowledgement. Emma told herself this was the way of practical men, unaccustomed to flowery sentiment. Pine Ridge appeared first as a smudge against the landscape, then gradually resolved into a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with houses and smaller structures scattered outward. It was late afternoon when the train finally hissed to a stop at the simple wooden platform that served as the town's station. Emma gathered her reticule and stood, smoothing her travel-rumpled skirt with trembling hands. Most passengers had disembarked at larger stations. Only a handful remained to step down onto Pine Ridge's platform. Through the window, Emma scanned the small crowd gathered to meet the train. Several families, a few rough-looking men, and there a tall figure standing slightly apart, hat in hand. Thomas Blackwell must be nearing 40, with a weathered face and broad shoulders beneath a well-worn coat. His posture was straight, his dark hair and beard flecked with silver. From this distance, Emma couldn't make out his expression, but something in his stance suggested impatience. The porter helped her down the steep steps, then retrieved her trunk. Emma stood on the platform, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance after days of travel. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Thomas Blackwell approached, his gait measured and deliberate. "Miss Wilson?" His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, with a slight rasp. "Mr. Blackwell." Emma extended, her gloved hand summoning a smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." He nodded, briefly clasping her fingers before releasing them. His eyes, a surprising shade of amber, moved over her face, her figure in quick assessment. Something in his expression shifted too, subtle to name. "Let me get your trunk." He turned away, speaking to the porter, making arrangements. No warm welcome, no smile in return. Emma stood rooted, the cold Montana air seeping through her traveling suit, wondering if the tightness in her chest was disappointment or simply fatigue. The drive to Thomas's ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. He handled the wagon with competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks, the church, the general store, the doctor's house, in terse phrases. Emma attempted conversation, commenting on the beauty of the landscape, asking about his cattle operation. His responses were polite but minimal, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "The town seems lovely," she offered. "It serves..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Its purpose. Thomas flicked the reins. "We're about 4 miles out. Land's good. House is solid. Nothing fancy, but it keeps out the weather." As they left the town behind, Emma struggled to reconcile this taciturn man with the letter writer who described Montana sunsets with unexpected poetry. Perhaps he was simply tired or uncomfortable with this first meeting. Perhaps the Thomas Blackwell of the letters would emerge once they knew each other better. The ranch appeared as they crested a gentle rise, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle gathered in dark clusters. Beyond stretched fenced pastures, and further still, the foothills rose toward distant mountains. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way, like a sketch drawn with bold, confident strokes. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, then carried her, trunk inside, while Emma stood uncertainly on the porch. The house was larger than she'd expected, with a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily. Through the windows, she glimpsed solid furniture and plain curtains. Inside, the main room combined kitchen and living areas with a large table, several chairs, and a stone fireplace where a modest fire crackled. It was clean and orderly, if somewhat barren. "No books," Emma noted immediately. "No paintings or ornaments. Beyond a few practical items. You must be hungry after your journey," Thomas said, setting her trunk near a doorway that presumably led to sleeping quarters. "There's stew keeping warm." "That would be lovely, thank you." Emma removed her gloves, turning slowly to take in what was to be her home. "Your house is very nice. Does what's needed." Thomas moved to the stove, stirring something in a large pot. His movements were efficient, practiced. "Hope you don't mind simple fare. I'm not one for fancy cooking." "Not at all." Emma unbuttoned her jacket, suddenly aware of how formal her traveling clothes must appear in this setting. "May I wash up first?" Thomas nodded toward another door. "Washroom's through there. Bedroom next to it will be yours for now." The implication in those words, "for now," hung in the air between them. Of course, they would not share quarters immediately. They were strangers still, despite their agreement to marry. Emma appreciated his propriety, even as she noted the awkwardness of their situation. The bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror hanging on the wall. Emma splashed water on her face, pinned back stray hair, and changed into a simpler dress, blue calico, serviceable but becoming. When she returned to the main room, Thomas had ladled stew into bowls and set the table with bread and coffee. They ate in silence, broken only by practical questions. Was her journey difficult? Did she find the room acceptable? Would she need anything from town tomorrow? Emma answered politely, watching Thomas from beneath lowered lashes. His hands were large and calloused, his manner restrained. Not unfriendly precisely, but guarded. After the meal, as Emma rose to help clear the dishes, Thomas remained seated, his expression unreadable. "Miss Wilson," he said finally, "there's something we should discuss." Emma sank back into her chair, her heart suddenly quickening. "Yes?" Thomas cleared his throat, running a hand over his beard. "Your letters mentioned you were a teacher in Boston." "Yes, for 15 years. You didn't mention your extensive education." Emma frowned slightly. "I attended Oberlin College before teaching. I wouldn't call it extensive, but it was thorough. The station master's wife mentioned it when I inquired about your arrival, said a college-educated Boston teacher was coming to marry me." His tone was neutral, but something in his posture had stiffened. She seemed quite impressed. "I hope that's not a problem, Mr. Blackwell." Emma chose her words carefully. "My education doesn't change who I am or my commitment to our arrangement." Thomas's fingers drummed once against the wooden table. "Miss Wilson, I'll be direct. I advertised for a wife who could manage a household, perhaps help with ranch accounts, and eventually raise children. I did not seek a woman with formal education beyond what's practical." A cold sensation spread through Emma's chest. "I don't understand. Surely my education could only benefit our household." "You misunderstand me." Thomas stood, pacing to the fireplace. "This is a simple life. Hard work, practical concerns. No place for intellectual pursuits or complicated ideas. In my experience, educated women grow restless with such limitations. They expect conversations and considerations that frontier life doesn't accommodate." Emma remained very still, dignity straightening her spine. "You believe I'm unsuitable because I've attended college?" "I believe you'll be unhappy here." He turned to face her, his expression not unkind, merely resigned. "And an unhappy wife makes for a difficult marriage. You're rejecting our arrangement." It wasn't a question. Thomas sighed heavily. "I think it would be best if we don't proceed. You seem a fine woman, Miss Wilson, but not the right woman for this place, for this life." Emma's mind raced through options, calculations. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey and shipping her possessions. Return passage to Boston would consume what little remained, leaving her nothing to restart her life there, a life she had already dismantled. "I see." Her voice was steady, despite the panic fluttering beneath her ribs. "And what do you suggest I do now, Mr. Blackwell?" "The stage returns through Pine Ridge day after tomorrow. I'll purchase your ticket to wherever you wish to go." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You're welcome to stay here until then." Emma stood, gathering the remnants of her pride. "That's very considerate. If you'll excuse me, I find I'm quite tired from my journey." In the small bedroom, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the rough wooden wall. No tears came, only a hollow sensation, as if something essential had been scooped from her chest. The situation was painfully, absurdly clear. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to be rejected, not because she was too old, too plain, or too sharp-tongued, but because she was too educated. Through the thin wall, she could hear Thomas moving about the main room, the clink of dishes being washed, the scrape of a chair, the sound of the front door opening and closing as he stepped outside. Abandoned to silence, Emma finally allowed herself to whisper the question that burned in her throat. What now? Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant cattle, the creak of the house settling, wind sighing around corners. Emma rose before dawn, washing and dressing by lamplight, determined to face whatever came next with dignity intact. When she emerged, Thomas was already up, building the morning fire. He nodded a greeting, indicated coffee brewing on the stove. They shared a breakfast of cornbread and bacon in strained silence. "I'll be taking you into town this morning," he said finally. "Thought you might want to arrange your affairs before the stage comes through." Emma nodded, a plan already forming. "Thank you. That would be helpful." Pine Ridge looked different in morning light, more substantial somehow, its buildings washed in golden sunshine that softened rough edges. As Thomas's wagon rolled down the main street, Emma noted details she'd missed yesterday. A small schoolhouse at the edge of town, women hanging laundry behind houses, children playing in dusty yards. Thomas drew the wagon to a halt outside the general store. "I have business at the bank and feed store. Will an hour be sufficient?" "Yes, thank you." Emma stepped down without waiting for assistance, straightening her shoulders beneath her wool jacket. "I'll meet you here." Inside the general store, a bell jangled above the door. The space was crowded with merchandise, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, tools hanging from ceiling hooks, fabric bolts stacked on counters. Behind the long wooden counter, a man looked up from account books. "Good morning. Ma'am, what can I help you with today?" His voice was pleasant, his smile genuine. Emma approached, removing her gloves. "Good morning. My name is Emma Wilson. I've just arrived from Boston and find myself in need of information about the town." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You'd be the lady who came to marry Thomas Blackwell." News traveled quickly in small towns, a fact Emma had forgotten. "I was. Circumstances have changed." The storekeeper's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "I see. Well, I'm Daniel Hayes, miss, owner of this establishment and lifelong resident of Pine Ridge. What information were you hoping for?" "Accommodations, to start, and potential employment opportunities." Emma kept her voice, matter of fact, betraying none of the desperation she felt. "I understand the stage doesn't come through until tomorrow." Daniel Hayes studied her, his brown eyes thoughtful beneath a shock of sandy hair. He was younger than Thomas, perhaps mid-30s, with an open countenance that suggested good humor. "We've got a small hotel down the street. As for employment..." He hesitated. "I was a teacher in Boston," Emma offered. 15 years experience with children of all ages." Something sparked in Daniel's expression. "Is that so? Our schoolteacher, Mrs. Abernathy, has been trying to retire for 2 years now. No replacement willing to come this far west for the salary the town can offer." Hope flickered, fragile, but persistent. "I would be very interested in speaking with the school board. Mayor Simmons heads it up. His office is next to the bank." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "If I may ask, Miss Wilson, what happened with Thomas? He's been planning for your arrival these past months." Emma hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Mr. Blackwell feels I would be unsuited to ranch life." Daniel's expression suggested he understood more than she'd said. "Thomas is a good man, but set in his ways, particular about how things should be." "Indeed." Emma glanced toward the window, checking for Thomas's return. "Mr. Hayes, I find myself in a difficult position. My possessions are being shipped here, but I'm no longer certain of my destination. Might I impose upon you to hold them until I've determined my next steps?" "Of course." Daniel nodded readily. "They can stay in my storeroom as long as needed. No trouble at all." Relief softened Emma's rigid posture. "Thank you. That's most kind." "Not at all." He hesitated, then asked, "Will you be staying in Pine Ridge then, if the teaching position works out?" "Perhaps." Emma hadn't thought beyond immediate necessities. It would depend on suitable accommodations, among other considerations. Daniel's gaze shifted past her shoulder. Thomas is back. For what it's worth, Miss Wilson, Pine Ridge could use someone with your experience. We've got 40 children in that schoolhouse and not enough learning to go around. The drive to Thomas's ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. He handled the wagon with competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks, the church, the general store, the doctor's house, in terse phrases. Emma attempted conversation, commenting on the beauty of the landscape, asking about his cattle operation. His responses were polite but minimal, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The town seems lovely, she offered. It serves its purpose. Thomas flicked the reins. We're about 4 miles out, land's good, house is solid, nothing fancy, but it keeps out the weather. As they left the town behind, Emma struggled to reconcile this taciturn man with the letter writer who described Montana sunsets with unexpected poetry. Perhaps he was simply tired or uncomfortable with this first meeting. Perhaps the Thomas Blackwell of the letters would emerge once they knew each other better. The ranch appeared as they crested a gentle rise, a sprawling single-story house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle gathered in dark clusters. Beyond stretched fenced pastures, and further still, the foothills rose toward distant mountains. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way, like a sketch drawn with bold, confident strokes. Thomas helped her down from the wagon, then carried her, trunk inside while Emma stood uncertainly on the porch. The house was larger than she'd expected, with a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily. Through the windows, she glimpsed solid furniture and plain curtains. Inside, the main room combined kitchen and living areas, with a large table, several chairs, and a stone fireplace where a modest fire crackled. It was clean and orderly, if somewhat barren. No books, Emma noted immediately, no paintings or ornaments, beyond a few practical items. You must be hungry after your journey, Thomas said, setting her trunk near a doorway that presumably led to sleeping quarters. There's stew keeping warm. That would be lovely, thank you. Emma removed her gloves, turning slowly to take in what was to be her home. Your house is very nice. Does what's needed. Thomas moved to the stove, stirring something in. A large pot. His movements were efficient, practiced. Hope you don't mind simple fare. I'm not one for fancy cooking. Not at all. Emma unbuttoned her jacket, suddenly aware of how formal her traveling clothes must appear in this setting. May I wash up first? Thomas nodded toward another door. Washroom's through there. Bedroom next to it will be yours for now. The implication in those words, for now, hung in the air between them. Of course, they would not share quarters immediately. They were strangers still, despite their agreement to marry. Emma appreciated his propriety, even as she noted the awkwardness of their situation. The bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror hanging on the wall. Emma splashed water on her face, pinned back stray hair, and changed into a simpler dress, blue calico, serviceable but becoming. When she returned to the main room, Thomas had ladled stew into bowls and set the table with bread and coffee. They ate in silence, broken only by practical questions. Was her journey difficult? Did she find the room acceptable? Would she need anything from town tomorrow? Emma answered politely, watching Thomas from beneath lowered lashes. His hands were large and calloused, his manner restrained, not unfriendly precisely, but guarded. After the meal, as Emma rose to help clear the dishes, Thomas remained seated, his expression unreadable. Miss Wilson, he said finally, there's something we should discuss. Emma sank back into her chair, her heart suddenly quickening. Yes, Warren Thomas cleared his throat, running a hand over his beard. Your letters mentioned you were a teacher in Boston. Yes, for 15 years. You didn't mention your extensive education. Emma frowned slightly. I attended Oberlin College before teaching. I wouldn't call it extensive, but it was thorough. The station master's wife mentioned it when I inquired about your arrival. Said a college-educated Boston teacher was coming to marry me. His tone was neutral, but something in his posture had stiffened. She seemed quite impressed. I hope that's not a problem, Mr. Blackwell. Emma chose her words carefully. My education doesn't change who I am or my commitment to our arrangement. Thomas's fingers drummed once against the wooden table. Miss Wilson, I'll be direct. I advertised for a wife who could manage a household, perhaps help with ranch accounts, and eventually raise children. I did not seek a woman with formal education, beyond what's practical. A cold sensation spread through Emma's chest. I don't understand. Surely my education could only benefit our household. You misunderstand me. Thomas stood, pacing to the fireplace. This is a simple life. Hard. Work, practical concerns. No place for intellectual pursuits or complicated ideas. In my experience, educated women grow restless with such limitations. They expect conversations and considerations that frontier life doesn't accommodate. Emma remained very still, dignity straightening her spine. You believe I'm unsuitable because I've attended college. I believe you'll be unhappy here. He turned to face her, his expression not unkind, merely resigned. And an unhappy wife makes for a difficult marriage. You're rejecting our arrangement. It wasn't a question. Thomas sighed heavily. I think it would be best if we don't proceed. You seem a fine woman, Miss Wilson, but not the right woman. For this place, for this life. Emma's mind raced through options, calculations. She had spent nearly all her savings on the journey and shipping her possessions. Return passage to Boston would consume what little remained, leaving her nothing to restart her life there, a life she had already dismantled. I see. Her voice was steady despite the panic fluttering beneath her ribs. And what do you suggest I do now, Mr. Blackwell? The stage returns through Pine Ridge day after tomorrow. I'll purchase your ticket to wherever you wish to go. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. You're welcome to stay here until then. Emma stood, gathering the remnants of her pride. That's very considerate. If you'll excuse me, I find I'm quite tired from my journey. In the small bedroom, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the rough wooden wall. No tears came, only a hollow sensation, as if something essential had been scooped from her chest. The situation was painfully, absurdly clear. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to be rejected not because she was too old, too plain, or too sharp-tongued, but because she was too educated. Through the thin wall, she could hear Thomas moving about the main room, the clink of dishes being washed, the scrape of a chair, the sound of the front door opening and closing as he stepped outside. Abandoned to silence, Emma finally allowed herself to whisper the question that burned in her throat. What now? Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Distant cattle, the creak of the house settling, wind sighing around corners. Emma rose before dawn, washing and dressing by lamplight, determined to face whatever came next with dignity and tact. When she emerged, Thomas was already up, building the morning fire. He nodded a greeting, indicated coffee brewing on the stove. They shared a breakfast of cornbread and bacon in strained silence. I'll be taking you into town this morning, he said finally. Thought you might want to arrange your affairs before the stage comes through. Emma nodded, a plan already forming. Thank you, that would be helpful. Pine Ridge looked different in morning light, more substantial somehow, its buildings washed in golden sunshine that softened rough edges. As Thomas's wagon rolled down the main street, Emma noted details she'd missed yesterday. A small schoolhouse at the edge of town, women hanging laundry behind houses, children playing in dusty yards. Thomas drew the wagon to a halt outside the general store. I have business at the bank and feed store. Will an hour be sufficient? Yes, thank you. Emma stepped down without waiting for assistance, straightening her shoulders beneath her. Wool jacket. I'll meet you here. Inside the general store, a bell jangled above the door. The space was crowded with merchandise, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned goods, tools hanging from ceiling hooks, fabric bolts stacked on counters. Behind the long wooden counter, a man looked up from account books. "Good morning, ma'am. What can I help you with today?" His voice was pleasant, his smile genuine. Emma approached, removing her gloves. "Good morning. My name is Emma Wilson. I've just arrived from Boston and find myself in need of information about the town." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You'd be the lady who came to marry Thomas Blackwell." News traveled quickly in small towns, a fact Emma had forgotten. "I was. Circumstances have changed." The storekeeper's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "I see. Well, I'm Daniel Hayes, miss, owner of this establishment and lifelong resident of Pine Ridge. What information were you hoping for?" "Accommodations to start, and potential employment opportunities." Emma kept her voice matter of fact, betraying none of the desperation she felt. "I understand the stage doesn't come through until tomorrow." Daniel Hayes studied her, his brown eyes thoughtful beneath a shock of sandy hair. He was younger than Thomas, perhaps mid-30s, with an open countenance that suggested good humor. "We've got a small hotel down the street. As for employment," he hesitated. "I was a teacher in Boston," Emma offered. 15 years experience with children of all ages." Something sparked in Daniel's expression. "Is that so? Our school teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, has been trying to retire for 2 years now. No replacement willing to come this far west for the salary the town can offer." Hope flickered, fragile but persistent. "I would be very interested in speaking with the school board. Mayor Simmons heads it up. His office is next to the bank." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "If I may ask, Miss Wilson, what happened with Thomas?" "He's been planning for your arrival these past months." Emma hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Mr. Blackwell feels I would be unsuited to ranch life." Daniel's expression suggested he understood more than she'd said. "Thomas is a good man, but set in his ways, particular about how things should be." "Indeed." Emma glanced toward the window, checking for Thomas's return. "Mr. Hayes, I find myself in a difficult position. My possessions are being shipped here, but I'm no longer certain of my destination. Might I impose upon you to hold them until I've determined my next steps?" "Of course." Daniel nodded readily. "They can stay in my storeroom as long as needed. No trouble at all." Relief softened Emma's rigid posture. "Thank you. That's most kind." "Not at all." He hesitated, then asked, "Will you be staying in Pine Ridge then, if the teaching position works out?" "Perhaps." Emma hadn't thought beyond immediate necessities. It would depend on suitable accommodations, among other considerations. Daniel's gaze shifted past her shoulder. "Thomas is back. For what it's worth, Miss Wilson, Pine Ridge could use someone with your experience. We've got 40 children in that schoolhouse, and not enough learning to go around." Emma turned to find Thomas entering, his expression carefully neutral as he glanced between her and Daniel. Something in his stance suggested wariness, as if he'd interrupted a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. "Ready to continue, Miss Wilson?" "Yes, thank you." Emma nodded politely to Daniel. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Hayes." "My pleasure." Daniel's smile encompassed them both, though it lingered on Emma. "Stop by any time if you need. Anything else?" Outside, Thomas helped her into the wagon with impersonal courtesy. "Did you find what you needed?" "Mr. Hayes was most helpful," Emma replied, arranging her skirts. "Would it be possible to visit the mayor's office before returning to the ranch?" Thomas gave her a sharp look. "Mayor Simmons? What business do you have there?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "I understand Pine Ridge is in need of a teacher. A muscle twitched in Thomas's jaw. "You're considering staying." "I'm considering my options, Mr. Blackwell." Emma kept her voice even. "As you've made clear, our arrangement is no longer viable. I must therefore secure my future by other means." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "The mayor's office is there, next to the bank." Mayor Simmons proved to be a corpulent, red-faced man with an expansive manner and shrewd eyes that assessed Emma thoroughly as she stated her qualifications and interest in the teaching position. "Well now, Miss Wilson, this is unexpected but most fortuitous," he declared, gesturing for her to take a seat in his cluttered office. "Mrs. Abernathy has been threatening to leave us high and dry for 2 years now. Her rheumatism makes the winters difficult, and her daughter in Denver has been after her to relocate. I understand the position may not offer substantial compensation," Emma said carefully. $20 a month, plus room and board," Mayor Simmons replied promptly. "The schoolhouse has a small attached residence, 2 rooms, basic but comfortable. Previous teachers have found it adequate." Emma calculated quickly. The salary was less than half what she'd earned in Boston, but without rent to pay and with the lower cost of goods in a small western town, it might suffice. And rooms of her own, the independence that would provide, was worth a considerable reduction in income. "The school term," she inquired. "September through May, with breaks for harvest and Christmas. We've 38 pupils currently, ages 6 to 16, varying levels of education." The mayor drummed his fingers on his desk. "I should warn you, Miss Wilson, Western children can be a handful, not as orderly as what you might be accustomed to in Boston." Emma allowed herself a small smile. "I've managed classrooms of 60 children in the poorest districts of Boston, Mayor Simmons. I believe I can handle 38 frontier children." He chuckled appreciatively. "No doubt you can at that. Well, the school board, such as it is, consists of myself, Reverend Polson, and Mrs. Hargrove, the doctor's wife. We can meet tomorrow morning to formalize matters. 9 o'clock suit you?" "Perfectly. Excellent." Mayor Simmons rose, extending his hand. "In the meantime, I suggest the Pine Ridge Hotel. Nothing fancy, but clean sheets and decent meals. Tell Mrs. Foster I sent you. She might offer a reduced rate considering the circumstances." As Emma left the office, she found Thomas waiting beside the wagon, arms crossed, expression inscrutable. The sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the street where townspeople went about their business, occasionally glancing curiously in their direction. "You've secured the teaching position then?" Thomas asked as she approached. "Not formally. The school board will meet tomorrow." Emma met his gaze directly. "I appreciate your patience, Mr. Blackwell. Would it be possible to retrieve my trunk?" "From your home. I'll be staying at the hotel tonight." Thomas nodded, something like grudging respect flickering in his eyes. "You move quickly, Miss Wilson. Necessity often demands it." Emma climbed into the wagon unaided. "I'd also appreciate if you could direct any shipments that arrive for me to Mr. Hayes's store. He's agreed to hold them temporarily." The return journey to the ranch passed in silence, more thoughtful than tense. Emma found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, not as the setting for a marriage that would never happen, but as a potential home nonetheless. The vastness remained intimidating, but there was beauty in it too, a raw honesty that appealed to something deep within her. At the ranch, Thomas carried her trunk to the wagon, while Emma gathered the few items she'd unpacked. In the bedroom, doorway, she paused, turning to him. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Blackwell." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "For what, precisely?" "I should have been more forthcoming about my education and background. It wasn't intentional deception. I simply didn't want to appear unsuitable." Emma smoothed her skirt. "You were right about one thing. I likely would have been unhappy here, at least in the role you envisioned." Thomas studied her, his expression softening slightly. No apology needed, Miss Wilson. Better to discover the mismatch now than after vows are spoken. Indeed, she offered a small smile. Thank you for your honesty, uncomfortable as it was for both of us. The Pine Ridge Hotel proved to be a two-story wooden structure with a wide front porch and clean, if Spartan, rooms. Mrs. Foster, the proprietress, was a thin, energetic woman who clucked sympathetically when Emma explained her situation, though her shrewd eyes suggested this wasn't the first time a mail-order marriage had dissolved before it began. You're welcome to stay as long as needed, dearie. Teaching job works out, you'll have the schoolhouse rooms soon enough. She showed Emma to a corner room on the second floor with a view of the main street. Meals included breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Don't be late or you'll miss out. As Thomas had promised, he'd paid for 2 nights' lodging. After he departed with a formal nod and wishes for her success, Emma sat on the narrow bed, suddenly overcome by the strangeness of her situation. 24 hours ago, she'd been anticipating the start of a new life as a rancher's wife. Now, she was alone in a hotel room in a frontier town 2,000 miles from everything familiar, with only the possibility of employment standing between her and destitution. Yet beneath the anxiety thrummed something surprising, a current of excitement, even liberation. No one in Pine Ridge knew Emma Wilson beyond what she chose to reveal. No one had preconceptions about proper behavior for a Boston school teacher or a woman who'd attended college. Here, she could define herself anew. The next morning, Emma dressed with particular care in her best day dress, forest green wool with ivory buttons and a modest lace collar. She arranged her hair neatly, donned her gloves, and made her way to the town hall where the school board awaited. The meeting proceeded more smoothly than she'd dared hope. Reverend Polson, a gentle-faced man with silver hair, seemed delighted by her credentials. Mrs. Hargrove, elegant even in frontier fashion, asked probing questions about teaching methods and discipline, nodding approvingly at Emma's answers. Well then, Mayor Simmons announced after less than half an hour, I believe we're all in agreement. Miss Wilson, we'd be pleased to offer you the position of school teacher for Pine Ridge, effective immediately. Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to stay through the week to acquaint you with the students and curriculum such as it is. Joy surged through. Emma tempered with pragmatism. Thank you. I accept most gratefully. Room and board, as discussed. $20 monthly, paid at the month's end. Mayor Simmons pulled papers from his desk. Standard contract, 1-year term initially, renewable by mutual agreement. As Emma signed the papers, Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward. Miss Wilson, we're having a small gathering at our home this evening. Just a few of the town's residents. Nothing elaborate, but it would give you an opportunity to meet some of the parents and community members. 7 o'clock, if you're not too tired from your travels. That's very kind. I'd be delighted to attend. Emma tucked the signed contract copy into her reticule. Might I visit the schoolhouse this morning? I'm eager to see my new workplace. The schoolhouse stood at the eastern edge of town, a plain rectangular building with a small bell tower and large windows to maximize natural light. Adjacent to it, connected by a covered walkway, was a modest dwelling that would become Emma's home. Inside the schoolhouse, rows of scarred wooden desks faced a teacher's table and blackboard. Bookshelves lined one wall, sparsely populated with worn volumes. Mrs. Abernathy, a stout woman with kind eyes and gnarled hands, greeted Emma warmly. Praise heaven you've arrived, Miss Wilson. These old bones can't take another Montana winter. The children are at lunch now. They'll be back within the hour. Together, they toured the facilities. The schoolroom with its pot-bellied stove, the small supply closet with precious chalk and paper, the living quarters with its serviceable kitchen, modest bedroom, and tiny sitting room. Everything was simple, but clean, the furnishings plain but adequate. "Not what you're accustomed to in Boston, I imagine," Mrs. Abernathy observed as Emma surveyed the bedroom. "Different, certainly, but entirely acceptable." Emma ran her hand over the patchwork quilt covering the narrow bed. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Well, you might not feel so grateful once you meet some of these young hellions," the older woman chuckled, "though they're good children at heart. Just need a firm hand and clear expectations. The older boys can be challenging. They'd rather be working alongside their fathers than learning grammar and mathematics." "I've encountered similar attitudes in Boston," Emma assured her. "Education's value isn't always immediately apparent to those eager to earn their way." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "You'll do fine then. The school board's vote of confidence means something. They don't take their responsibilities lightly." The children returned noisily, their curiosity about the newcomer momentarily overwhelming their manners. Mrs. Abernathy called them to order with practiced authority, introducing Emma as their new teacher. 40 pairs of eyes, ranging from openly curious to warily assessing, examined her as she stood beside Mrs. Abernathy's desk. Emma smiled, meeting their gazes directly. "Good afternoon. I'm Miss Wilson, recently arrived from Boston. I've been teaching for 15 years and look forward to continuing that work here in Pine Ridge." A small girl in the front row raised her hand hesitantly. "Is Boston very far away, Miss Wilson?" "Nearly 2,000 miles, Emma replied. "A journey of almost a week by train." This information produced impressed murmurs. A freckled boy near the back called out, "Why'd you come all the way out here? Ain't Boston much fancier?" "Boston is certainly larger, with many amenities that Pine Ridge lacks," Emma acknowledged. "But I was ready for a change. Sometimes new places offer opportunities we can't find in familiar surroundings." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly at her diplomatic response. "Miss Wilson will observe today and tomorrow, then gradually take over your lessons. I expect you all to demonstrate the manners and diligence you're capable of." The afternoon passed in a blur of reading recitations, arithmetic exercises, and geography lessons. Emma observed the varying educational levels, some of the older children reading quite proficiently, while others struggled with basic letters. Some demonstrating facility with multiplication, while others labored over simple addition. The challenge would be significant, but not insurmountable. Group work, peer tutoring, careful scheduling, strategies she'd employed in Boston would serve equally well here. By day's end, Emma's mind was already cataloguing needed improvements and potential approaches. Mrs. Abernathy departed with promises to return in the morning, leaving Emma to explore her new quarters more thoroughly. The sitting room contained a small writing desk, 2 chairs, and empty bookshelves that would soon hold her beloved volumes. The kitchen was equipped with basic cooking implements and an iron stove. The bedroom, though tiny, offered a comfortable bed, a sturdy wardrobe, and a washstand with pitcher and basin. Through the windows, she could see the town's main street in one direction and rolling prairie in the other. As Emma unpacked the few items from her trunk, placing clothing in the wardrobe and toiletries on the washstand, a knock at the door startled her. Opening it, she found Daniel Hayes standing on the small porch, hat in hand. "Mr. Hayes, this is unexpected." He smiled, shifting slightly. "Hope I'm not intruding, Miss Wilson. Thought you might need some essentials before you're properly settled." Only then did Emma notice the basket at his feet, covered with a checkered cloth. "That's very thoughtful. Nothing fancy, bread and preserves, coffee, some eggs and bacon for morning. Figured you wouldn't have time for shopping yet." Yet lifted the basket, offering it with a gesture that seemed almost shy. "Please, come in." Emma stepped back, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after a long day. "I was just arranging my things." Daniel entered, setting the basket on the small kitchen table. Heard from Mayor Simmons that you accepted the position. Congratulations. Thank you. It seems providential, given the circumstances. Emma smoothed her hair self-consciously. The timing couldn't have been more fortunate. Pine Ridge has needed a proper teacher for some time. Mrs. Abernathy does her best, but... He trailed off diplomatically. Her arthritis makes teaching difficult, Emma finished for him. She mentioned her eagerness to join her daughter in Denver. Daniel nodded, glancing around the modest quarters. Will this be comfortable enough for you? After Boston, I mean. More than adequate. Emma gestured toward the sitting room. Would you care for tea? I believe there's a kettle somewhere. Don't trouble yourself on my account. Daniel adjusted his stance, clearly uncertain whether to linger or depart. I should mention, the first of your crates arrived today, at the store as arranged. Pleasure bloomed unexpectedly. My books. That was remarkably quick. Books, is it? Daniel's expression brightened with interest. Many of them. Too many, according to most, Emma admitted with a small laugh. They're my greatest indulgence. What sort do you favor? If you don't mind my asking. History, poetry, novels, scientific texts when I can obtain them, philosophy occasionally, though I find some of it rather dense. Emma warmed to the subject, her earlier fatigue receding. And you, Mr. Hayes, are you a reading man? Something flickered in his expression, hesitation, perhaps embarrassment. Not as much as I'd like. Running the store leaves little time, and out here, books are scarce commodities. Perhaps you'd borrow from my collection once it's unpacked, Emma suggested impulsively. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss literature with a fellow reader. Daniel's smile spread slowly, transforming his pleasant face into something quite appealing. I'd like that very much, Miss Wilson. Another knock interrupted them, this one more authoritative. Emma opened the door to find Mrs. Hargrove, elegant in a plum-colored dress and bonnet. Miss Wilson, I thought you might appreciate an escort. To our gathering. She broke off, noticing Daniel. Mr. Hayes, good evening. Mrs. Hargrove? Daniel nodded respectfully, reaching for his hat. I was just delivering some provisions for Miss Wilson. I'll be on my way. How considerate. Mrs. Hargrove's tone revealed nothing, though her gaze moved between them with unmistakable curiosity. Will you be joining us this evening, Mr. Hayes? I wasn't aware I was invited, ma'am. He settled his hat on his head. Nonsense. The invitation extends to all of Pine Ridge's business owners. She smiled graciously. Dr. Hargrove specifically mentioned hoping to speak with you about ordering some special supplies. The Hargrove residence proved to be the largest home in Pine Ridge, a two-story structure with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch that spoke of Eastern comfort transplanted to the frontier. As Emma entered alongside Mrs. Hargrove, with Daniel Hayes following a respectful step behind, the sound of conversation and occasional laughter spilled from the brightly lit parlor. Most everyone's already here, Mrs. Hargrove explained, helping Emma remove her shawl. Nothing formal, just an opportunity for introductions. Emma smoothed her dress nervously. She'd changed into her second-best outfit, navy blue with delicate white piping, but still felt somewhat underdressed beside Mrs. Hargrove's elegant attire. Daniel, she noted, had dusted off his jacket and combed his hair, though he seemed no more comfortable with the prospect of socializing than she. Don't look so worried, Mrs. Hargrove murmured, correctly interpreting Emma's expression. Pine Ridge isn't Boston, but we do try to maintain some level of civilization out here, and they're all eager to meet you. The parlor contained about 20 people engaged in clusters of conversation. A piano stood in one corner with a young woman playing softly. Lamps cast a warm glow over comfortable furnishings that would not have been out of place in a modest Boston home. Conversations paused as they entered, faces turning expectantly toward the newcomer. Emma lifted her chin, assuming the confident posture she'd perfected before countless classrooms. "Everyone," announced Mrs. Hargrove, "may I present Miss Emma Wilson, our new school teacher recently arrived from Boston." The introductions passed in a blur. Dr. Hargrove, a distinguished man with kind eyes and a firm handshake, Reverend Paulson and his wife, the blacksmith and his family, several ranchers and their wives, the banker, the town's only lawyer. Emma noted that Daniel quietly separated himself, moving to speak with Dr. Hargrove while she was surrounded by curious townspeople. "Boston, gracious, what a change for you. How are you finding our little town so far? You must tell us about the latest fashions back east." "I do hope you'll find our children manageable. They can be rather spirited." Emma answered each question politely, careful to express appreciation for Pine Ridge without appearing to find it lacking compared to Boston. She mentioned the beautiful landscape, the clear air, the welcoming community, all true, if not the complete picture of her tumultuous arrival. No one directly mentioned Thomas Blackwell or her original reason for coming west, though Emma caught occasional glances that suggested the story was widely known. Small towns harbored few secrets, and a mail-order bride who became the school teacher instead of a rancher's wife was certainly fodder for gossip. "Miss Wilson," called a voice from nearby. Emma turned to find a woman of perhaps 40, fashionably, dressed with shrewd eyes. "I'm Adeline Crawford. My husband owns the bank. I understand you attended college in the East." "Yes, Oberlin College in Ohio," Emma confirmed. Mrs. Crawford raised an eyebrow. "How extraordinary. And what subjects did you study?" "Literature, history, mathematics, some natural sciences." Emma smiled slightly. A well-rounded education was considered important, even, perhaps especially, for women planning to teach. "Indeed," Mrs. Crawford's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "And did you find it valuable for teaching, I mean?" "Indispensable," Emma replied without hesitation. "Education isn't merely the transmission of facts, Mrs. Crawford. It's teaching children how to think, how to question, how to discover meaning. My own education provided models for that process." A few nearby conversations had quieted as people listened. Emma felt a familiar warming to her subject, the passion that had driven her through years in Boston classrooms. Some might consider advanced education wasted on children in a frontier town, Mrs. Crawford observed, though her tone remained neutral. "No education is ever wasted," Emma countered gently. "These children will build this community's future. They deserve every advantage we can provide them, the practical skills for immediate needs and the intellectual tools to envision something beyond what currently exists." A small silence followed her words. Then Dr. Hargrove spoke from nearby. "Well said, Miss Wilson. I, for one, am delighted to have someone of your qualifications guiding our young people." He raised his glass slightly. "To Pine Ridge's new teacher, may your time with us be both long and rewarding." Others echoed the sentiment, lifting glasses or nodding approval. Emma felt a flush of pleasure at the warm reception, so different from the cold disappointment she'd faced at Thomas Blackwell's ranch. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself drawn into multiple conversations, answering questions about Boston, discussing educational theories with the more intellectual members of the community, and learning about Pine Ridge's history and challenges. She discovered that the town had been established only 15 years earlier, growing slowly from a trading post to its current modest prosperity. Eventually, she found herself near the refreshment table, momentarily alone as she sipped punch. Daniel Hayes approached, offering a plate of small cakes. "You've made quite an impression," he observed quietly. Emma accepted a cake with a smile. "Everyone has been very welcoming." "Pine Ridge needs someone like you," Daniel said, his gaze direct. "Don't mind folks like Mrs. Crawford. She measures everything by whether it contributes to property values and bank deposits. You don't care for her." It wasn't a question. The Crawfords serve their purpose, as does everyone here. But they're not... He hesitated, searching for words. They're not what makes a community worth living in. "And what does, in your opinion?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. Daniel considered the question seriously. People who see beyond the immediate, beyond profit and practicality to what might be possible. People who value knowledge for its own sake, not just its application. He smiled suddenly, self-conscious. "Listen to me, philosophizing when I'm supposed to be making small talk." "I prefer philosophy to small talk," Emma assured him, "though perhaps that's why I found myself redirected from marriage to teaching." The reference to her changed circumstances slipped out unintentionally. Daniel's expression softened with understanding. "Thomas Blackwell is a good man in many ways," he said carefully. "Honest, hard-working, fair in his dealings, but his world is narrow, bounded by his fences and the changing seasons. He wants a certain kind of life, unchanging and predictable." "And you?" Emma asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What kind of life do you want, Mr. Hayes?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Hargrove appeared at Emma's elbow. "Miss Wilson, several of the mothers are asking about your plans for the younger children. Would you mind addressing their concerns?" The moment dissolved, and Emma was drawn back into her role as the town's new teacher. Throughout the remainder of the evening, she found herself aware of Daniel's presence across the room, though circumstances didn't allow them to resume their conversation. As the gathering dispersed, Emma found herself genuinely tired, but oddly invigorated. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt a sense of purpose and possibility. These people, whatever their individual limitations or biases, represented her new community. Their children would be her responsibility, their town her home. Mrs. Hargrove insisted on having her husband drive Emma back to the schoolhouse, despite her protests that the walk was short. As they bid goodnight at her door, the doctor clasped her hand warmly. "We're fortunate to have you, Miss Wilson. Not many women of your caliber would choose Pine Ridge over the opportunities of the East." "I didn't exactly choose it," Emma reminded him with a small smile. "Circumstances rather directed my path." Dr. Hargrove's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes the best destinations are those we didn't intend to reach. Good night, Miss Wilson. Welcome to Pine Ridge." The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Emma observed Mrs. Abernathy's teaching methods, familiarized herself with each student's abilities and challenges, and began planning improvements to the curriculum. Her personal possessions arrived in stages. First her clothing and household items, then the precious crates of books that she unpacked with reverent care, arranging them on the previously empty shelves in her small sitting room. Daniel Hayes delivered each shipment personally, rather than sending his young assistant. He carried the heavy crates with surprising ease, placing them exactly where Emma directed, and lingering to help open them if she permitted. His evident curiosity about her books led to brief but engaging discussions of favorite authors and titles. Emma found herself looking forward to these visits. The intellectual connection they offered a balm to the isolation she sometimes felt despite Pine Ridge's general welcome. On her 5th day in town, Emma encountered Thomas Blackwell outside the general store. The moment was awkward, but mercifully brief, both of them exchanging stilted pleasantries before he touched his hat and continued on his way. Emma watched him stride down the street, broad-shouldered and solitary, and felt a curious mixture of relief and sadness. They would never have suited, yet she couldn't help wondering what sort of life she might have built as the wife of such a man. By the following Monday, Emma had assumed full teaching duties. Mrs. Abernathy departed for Denver with tearful farewells from her students and the community's good wishes. Left to her own devices, Emma immediately began implementing changes, reorganizing the students by ability rather than age for certain subjects, introducing more advanced texts for the older children, establishing a lending library with her own books for those who wish to read beyond school hours. Some innovations were met with resistance. Several parents questioned the need for algebra and Latin for children destined for ranching or shopkeeping. Others worried that too much reading might distract from practical skills. Emma addressed each concern patiently, explaining how mathematical thinking improved problem-solving in any context, how exposure to another language enhanced understanding of English, how literature broadened perspectives essential for a growing community. Gradually, most opposition faded as students began returning home excited about their learning, tackling chores with rhymes they'd memorized, or explaining scientific principles that made daily tasks more intelligible. Emma established herself as firm but fair, demanding excellence while recognizing each child's individual circumstances and abilities. She refused to lower expectations based on a student's background or probable future, insisting that education was valuable regardless of one's eventual path. 3 weeks into her new position, Emma returned to her quarters after school to find Daniel Hayes waiting on her small porch, a package under his arm. She'd seen little of him lately, busy with teaching, and he with his store as autumn trade increased before winter's isolation descended. "Mr. Hayes, this is unexpected." He shifted, suddenly awkward in a way she hadn't seen before. "Thought you might be interested in this. Came in on yesterday's train." He held out the package. "It's a book. Well, several, actually." Emma accepted it, curious. "For the store?" "For you." He cleared his throat. "I ordered them from a bookseller in Helena after noticing gaps in your collection. Nothing presumptuous, I hope." Touched by the thoughtfulness, Emma carefully unwrapped the package. Inside were 3 volumes, a recent scientific text on natural history, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, and a novel she'd mentioned wanting to read. "Daniel," she breathed, forgetting formality in her surprise. "This is incredibly kind, but surely expensive. Consider it a welcome gift." His expression was earnest. "Every teacher needs resources. Please, come in." Emma stepped back, suddenly aware of the impropriety of a man visiting her quarters alone, yet unwilling to end this unexpected moment of connection. "I just made tea." The small sitting room felt different with Daniel's tall presence filling it. He stood examining her bookshelves while Emma prepared tea in the tiny kitchen, carrying the cups and a plate of biscuits to the small table between the room's 2 chairs. "Your collection is impressive," he commented as he joined her. "I've never seen so many books outside a proper library. Most were my father's originally." Emma poured tea with practiced grace. "He was a professor at Harvard. When he died, my mother and I had little to live on except his books and the education he'd insisted I receive." "Is that why you went to college? Because of him?" "Partly." Emma smiled at the memory. "He said daughters should inherit knowledge, just as sons inherit land. My mother was more practical. She saw education as security, something that couldn't be lost to financial misfortune or an unsuitable marriage." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Wise woman." She was. Emma sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "And you, Mr. Hayes? What brought you to Pine Ridge? You don't strike me as someone born to frontier life." "Perceptive of you." He set his cup down carefully. "My family owned a small printing business in Philadelphia. I was expected to take it over eventually, but I wanted something different. Something mine, not inherited. A rueful smile crossed his face. I came west with romantic notions of adventure. Ended up in Pine Ridge by chance. The previous storekeeper was retiring, offered to sell at a price I could afford. That was 8 years ago. Do you ever regret it? Leaving civilization behind? Daniel considered the question with typical care. Sometimes. Winter nights can be long, intellectual companionship scarce. He met her gaze directly. But there's freedom here, room to define yourself beyond others' expectations. I suspect you're discovering that. I am, Emma acknowledged. Though I miss certain amenities, libraries, museums, concerts. What about family? Do they worry about you out here alone? My mother passed 3 years ago. No siblings. A few cousins in New Hampshire, but we're not close. Emma fingered the edge of her saucer. In truth, I was rather alone, even in Boston. Teaching consumed most of my time and energy. And now you're teaching here. Daniel's tone was neutral. Do you miss your Boston students? They weren't so different from the children here, Emma replied, eager to learn when engaged properly, resistant when bored. Human nature is remarkably consistent, even across different settings. And your plans? Will you stay in Pine Ridge once your contract ends, or return east? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Emma considered it carefully. I have no reason to return to Boston, she said finally. My life there is finished. As for Pine Ridge, she gestured to the small room around them. I'm building something here. Not what I expected, but perhaps more suited to who I truly am. Daniel nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. The town is fortunate. And you? Emma asked, emboldened by his evident interest. Will Pine Ridge always be your home? It has been for 8 years. He smiled slightly. Though I admit I've occasionally considered other possibilities. Larger towns with more opportunities, but I've put down roots here. Built relationships, the store serves a purpose. They talked for another hour, conversation flowing easily between educational theories and literature, childhood memories and future aspirations. As dusk deepened outside the windows, Daniel reluctantly rose to leave. I've imposed on your evening. Long enough, he said, though his expression suggested reluctance. Thank you for the tea and the conversation. At the door, he hesitated. Miss Wilson, Emma, would you consider having dinner with me on Saturday? At the hotel restaurant, nothing formal, just continuation of our discussion. Emma felt a flutter of surprise and pleasure. I'd like that very much, Daniel. His smile warmed his entire face. Until Saturday, then. After he departed, Emma sat in the gathering darkness, tea forgotten, contemplating this unexpected turn. Daniel Hayes was unlike any man she'd known in Boston, neither an academic like her father, nor a status-conscious professional like her previous suitors. He combined practical capability with intellectual curiosity, directness with sensitivity. And he looked at her with appreciation for precisely those qualities Thomas Blackwell had found unsuitable. Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of light snow, the first of the season. Emma dressed with particular care in her best dress, a deep burgundy wool that complemented her chestnut hair. She pinned her mother's cameo at her throat and arranged her hair in a style more elegant than her usual practical coil. The hotel dining room represented Pine Ridge's attempt at sophistication, white tablecloths, actual silverware, and a menu that went beyond the basic fare offered in the town's only cafe. Several diners glanced up with undisguised interest as Emma entered, Daniel rising from a corner table to greet her. He too had made an effort with his appearance, his usually rumpled clothing exchanged for a well-tailored suit, his sandy hair neatly combed. The effect was striking, transforming the familiar shopkeeper into a handsome, distinguished figure. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he held her chair. "As do you." Emma replied with a smile. "I hardly recognized you without a crate in your arms or flower on your sleeve." Daniel chuckled, relaxing slightly. "The glamorous life of a shopkeeper. I clean up tolerably when required." The meal was pleasant. Roast beef with potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. They talked easily about books they'd both read. Daniel's upcoming inventory for winter supplies, Emma's plans for a Christmas recitation by her students. Neither mentioned Thomas Blackwell or the circumstances that had brought Emma to Pine Ridge. Yet his shadow seemed to linger at the edges of their conversation. As they finished dessert, Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I feel we should address the obvious, Emma. People are watching us with considerable interest." Emma nodded, having noted the occasional glances from other diners. Small towns thrive on such observations. Does it bother you? The attention, the inevitable speculation. Should it? Emma met his gaze directly. "We're two adults enjoying dinner together. Hardly scandalous." "No, but given your recent arrival and the changed circumstances," Daniel chose his words carefully, "I wouldn't want to cause you discomfort or complicate your position in the community." Emma considered this thoughtfully. "My position is quite straightforward. I'm the school teacher. My personal associations are my own affair, provided they don't interfere with my duties or conflict with moral expectations." She smiled slightly. "Are your intentions dishonorable, Mr. Hayes?" Daniel's serious expression dissolved into surprised laughter. "Most definitely not, Miss Wilson. Quite the contrary." "Then I see no reason for concern." Emma took a small sip of coffee. "In fact, I find I'm rather enjoying your company." Relief and pleasure brightened his face. "The feeling is entirely mutual." After dinner, they walked through the light snow toward Emma's quarters, conversation turning to the approaching winter. Daniel described the town's preparation for isolation when heavy snows made travel difficult. Stockpiling supplies, organizing community activities to combat cabin fever, planning for emergencies. "The first winter can be challenging for newcomers," he warned. "The darkness, the confinement. By February, even the most sociable become irritable with each other." "I've endured Boston winters," Emma reminded him. "Perhaps not as severe, but certainly long and dreary." "True, but you had libraries and museums to escape to. Here, resources for mental stimulation are limited." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Though perhaps that might change with someone of your background and interests involved." "What do you mean?" "Pine Ridge has never had a proper library or cultural society," Daniel explained. "No one with the knowledge or motivation to establish such things, but with your education, your books." He trailed off, watching her reaction. Emma's mind quickened at the possibility. A lending library, perhaps, or reading circles for adults as well as children. Exactly. Daniel's enthusiasm matched her own. There's hunger for such things here, though many wouldn't admit it. Long winter evenings with nothing but the same four walls and family stories, heard 100 times. It wears on the spirit. "We could begin with my books," Emma mused, already planning. "Perhaps solicit donations from Eastern publishers. I still have some connections through my father's colleagues." "The store has space that's underutilized," Daniel offered, "a back room that could be converted for community gatherings." They reached Emma's door, both reluctant to end the evening, and the shared vision they were constructing. Snowflakes caught in Emma's hair and on her eyelashes as she looked up at Daniel, seeing in his expression the same sense of possibility that had animated their conversation. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said softly. "May I call on you again?" Daniel asked, his voice equally quiet in the snow-muffled silence. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." For a moment, they stood close, the white breath of their exhalations mingling in the cold air. Then Daniel leaned down, gently pressing his lips to her cheek, the brief contact warming her skin, despite the winter chill. "Good night, Emma Wilson," he murmured. "I'm very glad Thomas Blackwell found you unsuitable." She laughed, the sound crystalline in the frigid air. "As am I, Daniel Hayes. As am I." The following weeks brought intensifying cold and the first serious snowfall, transforming Pine Ridge into a landscape of white brilliance that dazzled the eyes by day and reflected moonlight in ethereal patterns by night. Emma found herself busier than ever, teaching during school hours, planning the proposed library, and reading circle in the evenings, often with Daniel's practical assistance and intellectual contribution. They began spending many evenings together, sometimes at her quarters, sometimes at his rooms above the store. Their relationship developed with a comfortable mixture of intellectual companionship and growing emotional attachment. Daniel respected her independence while offering steadfast support for her educational innovations. Emma appreciated his thoughtfulness, his unexpected depth of knowledge, and his genuine interest in her ideas. Town reaction to their evident connection was generally positive, though Emma occasionally caught whispers or significant glances when they appeared together at church or community events. Mrs. Hargrove tactfully informed her that while her friendship with Mr. Hayes was entirely appropriate, certain proprieties should be observed to protect her reputation. "We're not as rigid as Eastern society," she explained over tea one afternoon. "Frontier life necessitates practical adjustments to formal rules, but as the teacher, you're held to a somewhat higher standard." "I understand," Emma assured her. "Daniel and I are being quite careful." Mrs. Hargrove studied her thoughtfully. "He's a good man, different from most here, educated, though he rarely shows it. Keeps to himself, generally." "Yes, I've noticed. He wasn't always so reserved. The first few years after he arrived, he organized reading groups, ordered newspapers and magazines for those interested, even tried to start a small lending library." Mrs. Hargrove sipped her tea. But there wasn't enough sustained interest. People were too busy with survival, with building the town. Intellectual pursuits seemed frivolous. "And now?" Emma asked. "Now the town is established. Basic needs are met. People have capacity for more than mere existence." She smiled slightly. "Your timing is fortuitous, Miss Wilson, as is your connection with Daniel Hayes." As winter deepened, Emma and Daniel's shared project took shape. The store's back room was cleared and furnished with shelves Daniel built himself, using pine harvested from nearby mountains. Emma organized her books, supplementing them with donations solicited through letters to her Boston connections and Daniel's business contacts. They established a simple lending system, with Emma keeping meticulous records of borrowers and return dates. The Pine Ridge Literary Society held its first meeting in mid-December, drawing a surprisingly diverse crowd, from Dr. Hargrove and the town's lawyer to several ranchers' wives, 2 miners, and even Mrs. Crawford from the bank. Emma led a discussion of a short story she'd selected for its accessibility and relevant themes, gently guiding conversation without dominating it. Daniel provided refreshments and occasional insights, clearly delighted by the community's engagement. The evening concluded with unanimous agreement to continue meeting bi-weekly through the winter. As the participants departed into the snowy night, many thanked Emma with genuine warmth for bringing a touch of civilization to their remote community. As winter settled fully upon Pine Ridge, blanketing the landscape in deep snow and shortening days to brief intervals of pale sunlight, Emma's life developed a rhythm both challenging and satisfying. School days began before dawn, with Emma rising in the cold darkness to light fires in both her quarters and the schoolhouse. Children arrived bundled against the bitter cold, their breaths forming clouds in the gradually warming classroom. Lessons proceeded with increased focus, the outside world's distractions muted by snow and isolation. Evenings alternated between Grading papers, planning lessons, managing the fledgling library, and increasingly spending time with Daniel. Their relationship deepened with the intimacy of shared purpose and genuine compatibility. Emma found herself watching the clock on days when they had arranged to meet, anticipating his arrival with a youthful eagerness that both amused and surprised her. "You've brought something essential to Pine Ridge," Daniel told her one evening, as they sat before the fire in her small sitting room, cataloguing new books that had arrived on the weekly stage. Not just education for the children, but possibility. The idea that life here can include beauty and thought, not merely survival. Emma looked up from her ledger, warmed by more than the fire. "I've merely built upon what you began years ago, perhaps." Daniel's expression was thoughtful as he examined a volume of Emerson's essays. "But you brought the conviction that it matters, the certainty that even frontier children deserve literature and ideas alongside practical skills." "All minds hunger for meaning," Emma replied simply. "Location doesn't change that fundamental need." As December progressed, Emma threw herself into preparations for the school's Christmas program. She organized recitations, musical performances, and a short play adapted from Dickens, assigning parts that challenged each child while acknowledging their abilities. Rehearsals filled lunch hours and after-school periods, with Emma patiently coaching nervous performers and mediating occasional disputes over roles or staging. The town embraced the upcoming event with unexpected enthusiasm. Mothers sewed costumes, fathers constructed a simple stage in the schoolhouse, and various community members contributed decorations, refreshments, and moral support. Even Thomas Blackwell, whose orphan nephew attended the school, donated lumber for scenery and made a point of asking the boy about his small role when they met Emma on the street one afternoon. That brief encounter was notably less strained than previous ones, with Thomas actually meeting her eyes as he touched his hat respectfully. "Here you're doing good work with the young'uns, Miss Wilson. Town appreciates it." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. Your nephew shows considerable promise in mathematics." Something like pride flickered across his weathered features. "Boy's got a quick mind. His father was the same way." As he walked away, Emma felt Daniel's questioning glance. They had never directly discussed Thomas or her initial reason for coming to Montana, though both were surely aware of its significance in their current circumstances. "Thomas seems to be accepting your presence more comfortably," Daniel observed. Carefully, Emma nodded, adjusting her shawl against the bitter wind. "Time diminishes most awkwardness, I suppose. Does it bother you, seeing him occasionally?" The question contained layers of potential meaning. Emma considered it as they walked toward the store, their feet crunching on packed snow. "Not in the way you might think," she said finally. "There's no lingering attachment. We never knew each other well enough for that. But I do sometimes wonder about the path not taken, the life I might have had as a rancher's wife." Daniel was silent for several steps, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret the change in circumstances?" Emma stopped, turning to face him directly, snow swirling around them in the early December twilight. "Not for a moment. What happened with Thomas was painful in the moment, but ultimately correct. We would have made each other desperately unhappy." She smiled slightly. "And I would never have found my true place here, or met you." Relief softened his features. "I've wanted to ask about it, about him, but wasn't sure if the subject was painful for you." "It's not," Emma assured, him resuming their walk. "Though it is somewhat embarrassing to have traveled across the country for a marriage that dissolved before it began. Less embarrassing than committing to a lifetime with someone fundamentally unsuited to you," Daniel countered. "Many wouldn't have had the courage to accept the change in plans and forge a new path." I had few alternatives, Emma reminded him wryly. Necessity often appears as courage. Don't diminish what you've accomplished, Emma. Arriving as a rejected bride and establishing yourself as a respected teacher and cultural force in less than 2 months. That's remarkable by any standard. The Christmas program exceeded everyone's expectations. The schoolhouse was packed with parents, siblings, and community members, extra benches and chairs brought from homes and businesses to accommodate the crowd. Lanterns hung from rafters, candles gleamed on windowsills, and evergreen boughs scented the air with their sharp, resinous fragrance. Emma watched proudly as her students performed with varying degrees of skill but universal enthusiasm. The youngest children recited memorized verses without forgetting too many words. Older students presented historical tableaux with appropriate gravitas, and the most talented offered musical performances on borrowed instruments. The Dickens adaptation concluded the evening, drawing genuine laughter and a few surreptitious tears from the appreciative audience. As the townspeople mingled afterward, enjoying cider and cookies while complimenting the young performers, Emma found herself the recipient of warm praise and gratitude. Parents who had initially questioned her Eastern notions now expressed appreciation for their children's evident progress. Even Mrs. Crawford commented that the program showed remarkable sophistication for a frontier school. Daniel appeared at Emma's side as the crowd began to disperse, handing her a cup of hot cider. Congratulations, you've won over even the skeptics. Emma sipped gratefully, suddenly aware of her exhaustion after weeks of preparation. The children deserve the credit. They worked tremendously hard. Because you inspired them to. Daniel's gaze was warm. I have something for you. A Christmas gift. He produced a small package from his coat pocket. Not to be opened until Christmas morning, of course. Touched by the gesture, Emma accepted it carefully. Daniel, you shouldn't have. I most certainly should. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. It's nothing elaborate, but I hope you'll like it. Before Emma could respond, Mrs. Hargrove approached, her expression pleased but thoughtful. Miss Wilson, what a wonderful evening. The children performed admirably. She glanced between Emma and Daniel. Mr. Hayes, I wonder if I might borrow our teacher for a moment. There's something Dr. Hargrove and I wish to discuss with her. Daniel nodded agreeably. Of course, I should help with the cleaning up anyway. He touched Emma's arm briefly. Find me before you leave. As he moved away to assist with dismantling the makeshift stage, Mrs. Hargrove guided Emma toward where her husband stood talking with Mayor Simmons and Reverend Polson. We've been discussing your contributions to Pine Ridge, Mrs. Hargrove explained quietly. Not just the school, but the library initiative and the literary society as well. Emma felt a flutter of apprehension. Had she overstepped some boundary, taken on too much beyond her official duties? Dr. Hargrove greeted her with a warm handshake. Magnificent program, Miss Wilson. Precisely what our community needed as winter sets in properly. Thank you, Emma responded, still uncertain about this impromptu meeting. Mayor Simmons cleared his throat importantly. The thing is, Miss Wilson, we've been considering ways to properly acknowledge your contributions. The school board met earlier this week and unanimously agreed to offer you a permanent position rather than the standard year-by-year contract. Relief and pleasure replaced Emma's concern. That's very gratifying. Additionally, Reverend Polson added, we'd like to formally recognize the library as a town institution with a small budget allocation for new acquisitions and necessary supplies. And a stipend for your management of it, Dr. Hargrove. Specified. Nothing substantial. The town's resources are limited, but a recognition of the additional responsibilities you've assumed. Emma's heart lightened further. I'm genuinely honored by your confidence. The library has been a labor of love, but official recognition would certainly help establish it permanently. We've observed the community's response, Mrs. Hargrove said with satisfaction. Even those initially skeptical have begun borrowing books or attending discussions. You've identified a genuine need. With Mr. Hayes's considerable assistance, Emma noted, unwilling to claim sole credit. The four exchanged glances that suggested another unspoken topic. Finally, Dr. Hargrove spoke carefully. Your association with Mr. Hayes has been noted. Of course, a natural connection given your shared interests and his involvement with the library project. Emma maintained a neutral expression, though her pulse quickened slightly. Daniel has been enormously helpful with the practical aspects of establishing the library. His knowledge of suppliers, shipping costs, and community interests has been invaluable. Of course, Mayor Simmons agreed hastily. Hayes is a solid citizen, an asset to Pine Ridge. Been here, 8 years now? Runs a tight operation, fair prices, extends credit when needed. Reverend Paulson smiled gently. What Dr. Hargrove is attempting to convey, perhaps, is that while your friendship with Mr. Hayes is entirely appropriate, as a permanent rather than temporary teacher, certain considerations become relevant. Understanding dawned. Emma straightened her shoulders slightly. Are you concerned about propriety, Reverend? Not at all, Mrs. Hargrove interjected smoothly. Rather, we're acknowledging that long-term arrangements often lead naturally to considerations of a more permanent nature between compatible individuals. And the community would view such a development favorably, Dr. Hargrove added, should matters progress in that direction. Emma felt warmth rising in her cheeks, partly embarrassment at this frank discussion of her personal life, partly pleasure at the implied approval. I appreciate your perspective. However, Mr. Hayes and I have not discussed any formal understanding, nor would we expect you to have done so after such a brief acquaintance, Mrs. Hargrove assured her. We merely wish to convey that should your friendship evolve towards something more defined, the town's response would be positive. The conversation concluded shortly thereafter with renewed congratulations on the evening's success and confirmation that formal paperwork regarding Emma's permanent position would be prepared after the new year. As the last audience members departed and the children left with their parents, Emma found herself standing in the nearly empty schoolhouse, emotions swirling like the snow outside the windows. Permanent position, official recognition for the library, tacit community approval of her relationship with Daniel. In less than 2 months, she had transformed from rejected bride to established community member with a secure future. The contrast. With her arrival, standing alone on the train platform, facing Thomas Blackwell's evident disappointment, could hardly be more stark. There you are. Daniel's voice drew her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, her coat over his arm. Ready to head home? It's getting colder by the minute out there. Emma smiled, crossing to join him. Yes, and I have news to share. They walked through the silent, snow-covered town, their footsteps leaving paired tracks in the fresh powder as Emma related the school board's offer and the official recognition of the library. Daniel listened with evident pleasure, his arm occasionally brushing hers as they navigated the uneven path. This calls for a celebration, he declared as they reached her door. Dinner at the hotel tomorrow evening, unless you're too exhausted from tonight's triumph. That would be lovely. Emma hesitated at her threshold, suddenly aware of the intimate tableau they presented. The isolated cottage, the snowy night, the two of them standing close in the lantern light. Daniel. He waited, his expression patient and expectant. The board members mentioned our friendship. They were quite explicit in their approval should it develop further. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. Were they indeed? How? progressive of Pine Ridge to engage in matchmaking alongside educational planning. The dry humor broke the moment's tension. Emma laughed softly. It was rather direct, almost as if they were granting permission I hadn't requested. Small towns, Daniel said with a slight shrug. Everyone considers themselves entitled to an opinion on their neighbor's affairs. His expression grew more serious. Does their interest make you uncomfortable? Not uncomfortable exactly, just aware that our association is observed and interpreted by others. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Would you prefer more discretion? We could meet less frequently or in more public settings. No, Emma said, quickly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. I value our time together precisely as it is. His smile returned, warming his eyes. As do I. Very much. He leaned forward, briefly pressing his lips to her forehead. Good night, Emma. Rest well. You've earned it after tonight's success. She watched him walk away through the falling snow, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the swirling, white darkness. Only when she could no longer see him did she enter her cottage, Daniel's wrapped gift clutched carefully in her hand. The days before Christmas passed in pleasant anticipation. School dismissed for a 2-week holiday, giving Emma time to thoroughly clean her quarters, catch up on correspondence with Boston acquaintances, and prepare modest gifts for those who had been particularly welcoming. Embroidered handkerchiefs for Mrs. Hargrove and the Reverend's wife, bookmarks for her most dedicated library patrons, and small sachets of dried herbs and spices for several neighbors who had shared produce from their root cellars. For Daniel, she had spent weeks secretly working on a waistcoat using skills learned from her mother years earlier. The material, fine wool in a subtle grey, had been ordered specially through a connection of Mrs. Hargrove's, arriving barely in time for Emma to complete the garment with careful stitches during evening hours when Daniel was occupied with store inventory. Christmas Eve brought a community gathering at the church, with carols, scripture readings, and a simple pageant performed by the youngest children. Emma attended alongside Daniel, both of them joining in the familiar hymns and traditions that connected this frontier outpost to communities across the country celebrating the same holiday. Afterward, Daniel escorted her home through gently falling snow, the town unusually quiet as families settled in for their private celebrations. At her door, he hesitated. Would you join me for Christmas dinner tomorrow? Nothing elaborate. I'm a passable cook, but no culinary artist. But I'd like to share the day with you. Emma smiled, touched by the invitation that acknowledged their growing closeness. I'd be delighted. What time shall I come? 2 o'clock? That should give us both time for morning reflections. His expression was both hopeful and slightly nervous, as if uncertain of her response, despite their established connection. Perfect. Emma hesitated, then impulsively rose on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. Merry Christmas, Daniel. His smile transformed his face, erasing the habitual seriousness. Merry Christmas, Emma. Until tomorrow. Christmas morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, sunlight creating diamond sparkles across untouched snow. Emma rose early, lighting her small stove and brewing coffee before settling in her favorite chair with Daniel's gift on her lap. The package was modestly wrapped in brown paper with a simple red ribbon, practical yet thoughtful, like the man himself. Opening it carefully, Emma found a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with a simple floral design carved into its lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a silver pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant was circular, engraved with an open book and tiny stars surrounding it. A small note accompanied the gift, written in Daniel's neat hand, "For the woman who brings light through words, with deepest affection, Daniel." Emma lifted the necklace with trembling fingers, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It wasn't merely pretty, It was meaningful, acknowledging her passion for education and literature. She fastened it around her neck immediately, the silver cool against her skin, but quickly warming. The remainder of the morning passed in peaceful solitude as Emma read by the fire, prepared vegetables for their dinner contribution, and dressed with particular care in her best dress, the deep burgundy wool she'd worn for their first dinner. Together, now paired with Daniel's pendant prominently displayed at her throat. At precisely 2 o'clock, she knocked on the door of Daniel's quarters above the store, a basket containing fresh rolls and apple preserves on her arm, his carefully wrapped gift in her other hand. He opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting nearby, his face lighting with pleasure at her arrival. "Merry Christmas, Emma. Come in. It's far too cold to linger in doorways." His quarters were larger than her cottage, consisting of a spacious main room that combined kitchen and living areas, with doors leading presumably to a bedroom and office. The space reflected Daniel himself, practical yet comfortable, with furniture that suggested quality rather than ostentation, and bookshelves lining one entire wall. A small table near the kitchen area was set for two, with actual china plates and what appeared to be silver cutlery. Clearly special occasions merited his finest possessions. The room was warmed by a large stone fireplace and filled with delicious aromas: roasting chicken, baking potatoes, cinnamon and nutmeg. Emma breathed deeply, appreciating both the scents and the evident effort Daniel had made for their celebration. "It smells wonderful," she said, removing her coat and hanging it on a peg near the door. "And your home is lovely." Daniel accepted the basket with a grateful smile. "Nothing elaborate, but it suits me, though it's never seemed quite so welcoming as it does today." His gaze moved to the pendant at her throat, pleasure evident in his expression. "You're wearing it." Emma touched it gently. "It's beautiful, Daniel, truly. The most thoughtful gift I've received in years." His pleased expression deepened. "I'm glad you like it. I had it made in Helena. Sent the design weeks ago and worried it wouldn't arrive in time." "It's perfect." Emma extended her own package, though I fear my offering may seem humble by comparison. Daniel unwrapped the waistcoat with careful attention, his expression softening as he realized what it was. "You made this?" "Yes," Emma admitted, suddenly nervous about the gift's reception. "My mother insisted I learn practical skills alongside academic pursuits. I'm not an expert seamstress, but it's exquisite," Daniel interrupted, examining the neat stitching and perfect buttonholes. "No one has made clothing for me since my mother died when I was 16. This is..." He looked up, emotion evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Emma. I shall wear it with tremendous pride." The moment stretched between them, warm with unspoken feelings. Then Daniel cleared his throat slightly. "I should check on our dinner. Would you like wine? I've been saving a bottle from San Francisco for a special occasion." "That would be lovely." The meal that followed was among the most pleasant of Emma's life. Perfectly prepared food, engaging conversation, and the warm intimacy that comes from sharing a holiday with someone whose company brings genuine joy. They discussed books they'd both enjoyed, debated philosophical questions without rancor, and shared stories from their respective childhoods. Emma's in academic Boston, Daniel's in bustling Philadelphia. As they lingered over coffee and the apple tart Emma had contributed to their feast, Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the school board's interest in our friendship." Emma set down her coffee cup carefully. "Oh? Well, while I find their matchmaking presumptuous, their approval does remove certain potential obstacles." Daniel met her gaze directly. "Emma, I'm not a man given to impulsive declarations or hasty attachments. Before you arrived in Pine Ridge, I had resigned myself to a life of reasonable contentment but limited companionship. The town offers few people with whom I can share ideas or genuine conversation." Emma nodded. understanding completely what he described. Intellectual isolation can be as challenging as physical isolation. Precisely. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Then you arrived, under difficult circumstances, facing disappointment that would have defeated many. Instead of retreating, you built something new, something remarkable. His expression softened, and in doing so, you awakened possibilities I'd long since abandoned. Emma's heart quickened, though she maintained her composure. What possibilities? A shared life, mutual understanding, the joy of connection with someone who sees the world with similar appreciation for knowledge and beauty. Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I'm not Thomas Blackwell, offering a ready-made life into which you must fit yourself. What I imagine is a partnership. Your teaching, my business, our shared commitment to bringing literature and ideas to this community. Daniel? Emma began, emotion making her voice unsteady. I'm not proposing marriage today, he clarified quickly. That would be premature, despite the town's apparent eagerness to see us established. But I'm declaring my intentions with complete seriousness. My feelings for you have grown steadily since our first real conversation, and I see no reason why they should diminish with further acquaintance. Emma turned her hand beneath his, linking their fingers. Nor do I. Relief and happiness transformed his expression. Then you feel something similar? I do. Emma smiled, the simple words carrying the weight of profound truth. When Thomas rejected me, I thought perhaps I was fundamentally unsuitable, too educated, too independent for any man to truly accept. You've shown me otherwise. You value precisely those qualities others have found problematic. Because they're intrinsic to who you are, Daniel said simply. Asking you to diminish your intelligence or curiosity would be like asking the sun not to shine so brightly. Emma laughed softly at the poetic comparison. Hardly the sun, Daniel. Perhaps a modest lamp. A beacon, he countered, squeezing her hand gently, illuminating possibilities for an entire community. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the hearth, snow falling gently outside the windows. Emma felt a profound sense of rightness, of having arrived exactly where she belonged, despite the circuitous and painful route that had brought her there. What happens now? She asked eventually. Daniel smiled. Now we continue as we have been, enjoying each other's company, building the library's collection, deepening our understanding of one another. And when the time feels right for both of us, we'll formalize our arrangement. Very sensible, Emma approved, though perhaps not terribly romantic. His expression grew serious. I believe true romance lies in genuine appreciation, not grand gestures or flowery declarations. I admire your mind, your resilience, your commitment to ideals. I enjoy your company more than anyone I've ever known. And he hesitated, a hint of color touching his cheeks. I find you beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with conventional standards. Emma felt warmth spread through her at his words. That may be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Daniel rose, still holding her hand, drawing her gently to her feet. Then allow me to complement it with something slightly less verbal. His kiss was gentle but confident, communicating affection and respect alongside unmistakable desire. Emma responded with equal feeling, her free hand resting lightly on his chest, aware of his heartbeat beneath her palm. When they separated, Daniel's expression held wonder and contentment. Merry Christmas, Emma Wilson. Merry Christmas, Daniel Hayes. She smiled up at him, joy bubbling through her veins like the champagne she'd tasted once at a faculty celebration in Boston. I believe this is the beginning of something rather wonderful. The winter months that followed unfolded with unexpected sweetness. Emma's teaching duties resumed after the holiday break, her students returning to school with renewed energy and enthusiasm. The library continued to grow, with regular shipments of books arriving from Emma's Eastern contacts and Daniel's business associates. The Literary Society expanded its membership and activities, adding a monthly poetry reading alongside the regular discussion meetings. Emma and Daniel's relationship deepened naturally, their compatibility evident in both intellectual exchanges and quieter moments of simple togetherness. They established comfortable routines, Sunday afternoons spent reading before his fireplace, Wednesday evenings devoted to library organization, Saturday dinners, either at the hotel or prepared in one of their residences. Their growing attachment was evident to the community, generating approving smiles rather than censorious gossip. By late February, when winter's grip remained firm but the days had begun lengthening perceptibly, Daniel formally asked Emma to marry him. The proposal came during a quiet evening in her cottage, without elaborate staging or dramatic declarations, simply a heartfelt expression of his desire to build a life together, followed by the presentation of a simple gold ring, with a small sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. "It's not fashionable or elaborate," he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger. "I could order something more modern from Helena or San Francisco if you'd prefer." Emma shook her head, examining the ring with genuine pleasure. "It's perfect. It has history and meaning, far better than something chosen merely for show. Retry Claude can make mistakes. They set the wedding date for early June, when winter's harsh grip would have fully released the town, and travel would be easier for the few guests coming from nearby settlements. Emma wrote to her cousins in New Hampshire, not expecting them to make the journey but wanting to share her happiness. To her surprise, her mother's younger sister responded with congratulations and a promise to attend, expressing delight that Emma had found a companion who valued her intellectual gifts. News of the engagement spread quickly through Pine Ridge, generating a wave of goodwill that touched Emma deeply. Her students presented her with a handmade album containing their artwork and messages of congratulation. Mrs. Hargrove organized an impromptu gathering of the town's women to present Emma with kitchen implements, linens, and practical household gifts, along with advice of varying usefulness about married life. Even Thomas Blackwell acknowledged the news with unexpected grace when they encountered each other outside the general store one crisp March morning. He touched his hat respectfully, then hesitated before speaking. "Heard you and Hayes are to be married. Congratulations." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Emma replied, genuinely appreciative of his courtesy. Thomas shifted slightly, his expression suggesting internal debate before he continued. "Reckon things work out as they're meant to. Hayes is more suited to your capabilities." The awkward compliment warmed Emma unexpectedly. "I believe you're right. And I hope you find someone equally suited to yours." Something like a smile briefly touched his weathered face. "Maybe so. Town's growing. New folks arriving with the spring, they say." He nodded once more and continued on his way, leaving Emma with the distinct impression that their uncomfortable history had finally been properly concluded. As winter gradually released its hold on the landscape, Emma and Daniel began planning their shared future in earnest. They decided she would move into his larger quarters above the store after the wedding, converting one room into a private study where she could prepare lessons and pursue her own reading. The schoolhouse cottage would be available for a new teacher if the town ever grew large enough to require one, or could serve as additional classroom space if needed. Daniel proposed expanding the store's back room into a permanent library space, with proper shelving and a reading area where the Literary Society could meet regardless of weather conditions. Emma suggested combining the library with a small bookshop section, offering new volumes alongside lending services. "Pine Ridge is growing," she pointed out one evening as they reviewed architectural sketches Daniel had drafted. "As more families arrive, demand for books especially school texts and practical manuals, will increase. We could provide a valuable service while making the library more self-sustaining. Daniel smiled, never failing to be impressed by her practical insight, a perfect blend of cultural contribution and business sense. This is why we make such effective partners. Spring arrived in fits and starts. Warm, sunny days followed by sudden snowstorms, muddy streets giving way to green grass almost overnight. Emma's classroom windows were thrown open on mild days, allowing fresh air to replace the stuffiness of winter confinement. Students' attention wandered as nature's renewal competed with arithmetic and grammar, prompting Emma to incorporate more outdoor lessons. Botanical identification walks, surveying exercises, observational writing sessions beside the creek that ran behind the town. April brought the school year's final examinations, with Emma's students demonstrating remarkable progress compared to their baseline knowledge in September. Parents expressed genuine appreciation during the year-end exhibition, where each child displayed academic work alongside practical projects, maps, scientific diagrams, essay compositions, and mathematical calculations. "You've transformed this school," Mayor Simmons declared during the closing ceremony. "These young people aren't just memorizing facts, they're thinking, questioning, applying knowledge to real situations. That's education of the highest order." Emma accepted the praise with appropriate modesty, though privately she felt tremendous satisfaction in the visible results of her teaching methods. The children had responded to her high expectations with dedication and enthusiasm, many surpassing what they had believed possible for themselves. By early May, wedding preparations intensified as Emma's aunt's arrival date approached. Daniel added a fresh coat of paint to their future shared quarters, installed additional bookshelves to accommodate their combined collections, and commissioned a new bed from the town's carpenter. A gesture that made Emma blush when he mentioned it, though the practical necessity was undeniable. Emma sewed her wedding dress in evening hours after school obligations were complete. Nothing elaborate, but a becoming creation of cream-colored silk with lace she'd carefully preserved from her mother's wedding gown. Mrs. Hargrove and several other women insisted on handling the wedding refreshments, planning a celebration that would include the entire community in the schoolyard, weather permitting. The week before the wedding brought a surprising visitor, a young woman who arrived on the eastbound stage, inquiring at the hotel about possible teaching positions. When directed to speak with Emma, she presented herself at the schoolhouse, just as classes were dismissing for the day. "Miss Wilson, I'm Catherine Palmer." She extended her hand with confidence. "I've recently completed teacher training in Denver and heard Pine Ridge might need an assistant teacher for the coming year." Emma invited her in, curious about this unexpectedly fortunate arrival. Catherine proved to be intelligent and well qualified, with progressive educational ideas similar to Emma's own. When Emma explained her upcoming marriage and potential need for occasional substitute teaching, Catherine expressed enthusiastic interest. "I had hoped for a full position," she admitted, "but beginning as an assistant would provide valuable experience. And if the town continues growing as they predict, perhaps eventually." "Exactly my thinking," Emma agreed. "The school board has discussed the possibility of expanding to 2 full classrooms within a year or two. Starting as my assistant would position you perfectly for advancement." As they discussed educational philosophy and practical teaching approaches, Emma felt a curious sense of completion, as if her own journey had come full circle with the arrival of another educated woman ready to contribute to Pine Ridge's development. Emma's Aunt Martha arrived 3 days before the wedding, a sprightly woman in her 60s whose academic background as a former girls' school headmistress made her immediately appreciative of what Emma had established in this frontier community. "Your mother would be immensely proud," she declared after touring the school and library. "She always believed your education would allow you to create something meaningful wherever life took you. Though I doubt she imagined Montana Territory." Meeting Daniel prompted her immediate approval. A thinking man with practical capabilities and evident appreciation for your intellect. Excellent choice, Emma. The wedding day dawned clear and warm. Spring's renewal evident in wildflowers dotting the surrounding hills and fresh leaves adorning the trees along Pine Ridge's main street. Emma dressed with her aunt's assistance, the simple elegance of her gown complemented by Daniel's Christmas pendant and a bouquet of early blooms gathered by her students. The ceremony took place in the church, with Reverend Polson officiating before a congregation that included virtually every resident of Pine Ridge. Daniel waited at the altar, unusually formal in a new suit with Emma's handmade waistcoat prominently displayed. His expression, as she walked toward him, contained such genuine wonder and happiness that Emma felt tears threatening despite her determination to maintain composure. The traditional words held deeper meaning for having been chosen rather than merely accepted. Emma spoke her vows with clear conviction. The journey that had brought her to this moment, with this man in this community, adding profound weight to each promise. Daniel's responses carried equal certainty, his steady gaze never leaving hers as they formalized the partnership they had been building since those first conversations in the general store. The celebration afterward spilled across the schoolyard and into the main street, with tables laden with food, musicians playing dance tunes, and children racing about in their Sunday best. As dusk approached, lanterns were lit, creating a magical atmosphere of golden light against the deepening blue sky. Emma and Daniel moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their neighbors and friends. During a quiet moment, standing slightly apart from the festivities, Daniel took Emma's hand, running his thumb across the gold band that now accompanied her engagement ring. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" Emma smiled at the new name. Still unfamiliar, but entirely welcome. "Completely. Though I might continue using Miss Wilson professionally, if you don't object. The children are accustomed to it." "I have no objection to any arrangement that acknowledges both your independence and our connection," Daniel assured her. "You've never been a woman defined solely by relationship to others. That's precisely what I love about you." Emma leaned against him slightly, watching the celebration that marked the beginning of their shared life. "It's rather remarkable, isn't it? None of this would have happened if Thomas Blackwell hadn't found me unsuitable." Daniel chuckled softly. "His profound misjudgment was my extraordinary fortune." He gestured toward the gathering where Thomas himself was conversing with Catherine Palmer, the visiting teacher, though perhaps he's learning to appreciate educated women after all. "That would be a fitting conclusion," Emma observed with amusement. "The full circle of our unusual story." As night fell properly and stars appeared above the mountains, Emma found herself contemplating the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. The painful rejection that had initially seemed a catastrophic failure had actually been the necessary redirection toward her true purpose and partnership. Later that evening, as they walked together to their now shared home, Emma paused to look back at the town stretched along its single main street. The schoolhouse, where she'd found her professional fulfillment, the store that housed their expanding library, the church where they'd just exchanged vows. What had once been an unknown destination, a mere name on a train ticket purchased in desperation, had become the center of a life richer than anything she could have imagined in Boston. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Emma smiled up at him, at this man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "That sometimes our greatest disappointments lead us exactly where we're meant to be. That being rejected for who you truly are can be the first step toward finding someone who loves you precisely for those same qualities. Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then I'm profoundly grateful that Thomas Blackwell couldn't recognize the treasure standing before him, his loss, my immeasurable gain. Hand in hand, they continued toward home, toward the shared life they had chosen with clear eyes and full hearts, built not on compromise or convenience, but on genuine appreciation of each other's true nature. Emma Wilson, now Hayes, had traveled west seeking a husband and found instead her authentic self, a community that valued her contributions, and a partner who saw her education not as a liability, but as her greatest strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.